The Grand Synod of the Ethelgard Dominion did not tolerate silence, for silence was the harbinger of the void, and the void was the enemy that now knocked upon the golden gates of their civilization. In the colossal obsidian amphitheater, suspended within the gravimetric heart of the capital station, the air shimmered with the heat of 1,000 projections and the nervous respiration of high-caste nobility. The architecture itself was a testament to 1,000,000,000 years of unbroken lineage, sweeping arches of neutron-forged alloy and tapestries woven from localized starlight, all designed to intimidate and awe. Yet today, the grandeur felt like the decorations of a tomb. High Counselor Xylthas, his carapace polished to a mirror sheen that reflected the grim faces of his peers, gripped the edge of his podium until the bioluminescent veins in his hands pulsed with a frantic violet hue. He looked out over the assembly, seeing not the proud rulers of 100 systems, but a collection of frightened creatures waiting for the inevitable end. The holographic display dominating the center of the chamber showed the encroaching darkness of the scourge they called the Null Vector, a silent, consuming fleet of unknown origin that did not negotiate, did not pause, and did not leave wreckage. It simply erased. And against this erasure, the Ethelgard's immaculate golden armadas were shattering like glass thrown against a mountain. The latest telemetry from the Keth sector is final, Xylthas said, his voice amplified by the acoustic harmonics of the chamber, rolling over the assembly like a funeral dirge. The 7th Fleet has ceased to transmit. We must assume total dissolution. The Null Vector has bypassed the outer bastions and is currently burning a path toward the binary manufacturing hubs of orcs. If orcs falls, our ability to replenish the shield ships ends within a planetary rotation. A murmur of terror rippled through the hall, a sound like dry leaves skittering over stone. It was a breach of protocol, a crack in the facade of their composure, but Xylthas could not find the will to reprimand them. He felt the same cold knot in his digestive tract, the primal fear of a prey animal that realizes the predator is no longer stalking, but charging. A representative from the scientific caste, a slender being draped in robes of data filament, rose slowly from the lower tiers. "High Counselor," the scientist said, their voice trembling with a mixture of fear and disdain. "We were promised salvation. The diplomatic envoys assured us that the Terran Union had accepted our petition for aid. They claimed their capabilities were asymmetrical, that they could turn the tide. Where are they? The scanners show nothing but background radiation and the dust of our own failures." Xylthas closed his eyes for a moment, summoning the memory of the human delegation. They had been so small, so unadorned. No golden armor, no chanting attendants, no display of pedigree. They had walked into this very chamber wearing simple, utilitarian fabrics, their faces exposed and unreadable. They had listened to the plight of the Ethelgard, to the tales of the Null Vector's unstoppable advance, with a stillness that Xylthas had initially mistaken for stupidity. When they spoke, it was without the flowery rhetoric of the Dominion. They had simply said, "We will deploy." "They are here," Xylthas said, opening his eyes and gesturing to the sensor technicians. "Or at least their vanguard is. Show the local space around orcs. Magnify the debris field of the 4th Fleet's graveyard." The hololith shifted, zooming in past the burning husks of Ethelgard cruisers, past the drifting clouds of plasma and frozen atmosphere. The image stabilized on a region of space that should have been empty, save for the wreckage of war. Instead, it showed a solitary, indistinct shape. It was not a fleet. It was not a dreadnought of golden alloy. It was a single, small vessel, barely larger than a shuttle, drifting silently amidst the ruin. That. The exclamation came from General Kale, a warrior whose armor was scarred from a dozen campaigns. "That is the salvation of the Dominion. It looks like a scavenger pod. It has no shielding signature. Its energy output is negligible. High Counselor, this is a mockery. The humans have sent a spectator to watch us die." The general's outrage was palpable, fueling the anger of the council. They had expected the legendary Terran warbarges, the kinetic destroyers they had heard rumors of in the galactic fringes. They expected fire and thunder. Instead, they got a silent speck in the dark. Xylthas felt the weight of their disappointment crushing him, but he also felt a strange, nagging curiosity. The humans had been calm, too calm. They had not asked for payment nor territory. They had asked only for the coordinates of the densest concentration of wreckage. At the time, Xylthas thought they meant to study the enemies weep. On impact, now looking at the tiny ship floating amidst the millions of tons of shattered Ethelgard steel, he wondered if he had misunderstood the very nature of their request. "They are hailing us," the communications officer announced, her voice pitched high with confusion. "Audio only, direct channel to the High Council." Xylthas signaled for the connection. Static hissed through the pristine acoustics of the chamber, a gritty, analog sound that grated against their sophisticated ears. Then a voice cut through, deep, resonant, and terrifyingly relaxed given the proximity of the enemy fleet. "This is Constructor Captain Elias Thorne of the Terran Engineering Corps," the voice said. "We are in position. We request that your remaining forces at Orcs pull back to a perimeter of 10,000 light seconds. Do not engage the enemy. Repeat, do not engage. You're just feeding them mass. Let them come to the graveyard." General Kale slammed his fist onto his console. "Pull back. You ask us to abandon the manufacturing hubs to a scavenger tug. You have brought no weapons. You have brought no fleet. How dare you command the Ethelgard Armada to retreat?" There was a pause on the line, a silence that stretched for seconds, filled only by the background hum of machinery on the human end. When Thorne spoke again, his tone had not changed. It remained flat, professional, and devoid of the panic that infected the council. "We didn't bring a fleet, General. That would have been inefficient. The mass transit costs alone would bankrupt a sector. We brought the catalyst. You've already provided the materials. Now clear the zone or you'll be part of the Foundation." The transmission cut. The council erupted into chaos, shouting demands for the humans to be arrested, for the fleet to attack, for order to be restored. But Xylthas stared at the hologram. The tiny human ship had begun to move. It wasn't moving away from the enemy. It was diving deeper into the wreckage field, into the heart of the twisted metal and shattered hulls of the fallen Fourth Fleet. And as it moved, the sensors began to scream. It wasn't an energy weapon signature. It was a gravitational anomaly. A localized distortion field that was grabbing the debris, massive shards of hull plating, broken warp coils, entire severed bridges of cruisers, and pulling them toward the tiny ship. "They aren't fleeing," Xylthas whispered, the realization dawning on him with the slow, horrifying creeping of a sunrise on a doomed world. "They are gathering." Asterisk out in the cold vacuum of the Oryx system, Fleetmaster Valerius watched his tactical plot with the weary eyes of a man who had sent 10,000 souls to their deaths in the last rotation. His command ship, the Gilded Spear Asterisk, was venting atmosphere from 3 decks, and his shield generators were operating at critical variance. The order to retreat had come from the High Council, an order that tasted like ash in his mouth, but looking at the tactical reality, he knew it was the only option. The Null Vector fleet was a dark tide, a geometric nightmare of black pyramids that absorbed light and sensor pings alike. They were closing in, their silence more terrifying than any battle cry. "Helm, bring us about," Valerius croaked, his voice raw. "Align with the perimeter coordinates provided by the Terran vessel." The bridge crew obeyed, though he could feel their hesitation. To run was shameful. To run while a single alien shuttle stayed behind was inexplicable. "Fleetmaster," his sensor officer called out, "energy spike from the debris field. It's incoherent." "I'm reading multiple welding lasers, magnetic grapples, and high-yield molecular bonding agents. It's happening at a scale I can't process. The Terran ship isn't just pulling debris, it's knitting it." Valerius turned his gaze to the main view screen. The magnification system struggled to make sense of the visual data. The tiny human ship, which they had dismissed as a scavenger, was now the epicenter of a swirling cyclone of scrap. Huge sections of Ethelgard gold alloy armor were slamming together, sparks of plasma welding lighting up the dark like a thunderstorm. It looked chaotic, a violent implosion of garbage, but as Valerius watched, he saw the patterns. The humans were not just piling junk, they were constructing. The speed was impossible. No shipyard in the Dominion, even the sacred forges of the core, could lay a keel in less than a cycle. The humans were doing it in minutes. The central ship acted as a brain, sending out swarms of nanite clouds and drones that acted like weaving spiders. They stripped the ruined cruisers of their reactors, their weapon capacitors, their armor plates. They cannibalized the dead to build a golem. "It's ugly," the helmsman whispered, breaking protocol, and he was right. It was a monstrosity. There was no symmetry, no golden ratio, no aesthetic grace. It was a jagged, brutalist lump of fused metal. A Frankenstein's monster of a starship growing like a cancer in the void. It had the prow of a destroyer welded to the engine block of a frigate, flanked by the severed wings of a carrier. It was asymmetrical, lumpy, and scarred, but it was getting big, fast. "The Null Vector has entered firing range of the debris field," the tactical officer announced. "They are targeting the anomaly." Beams of antimatter, dark and crackling, lashed out from the black pyramids, striking the growing mass of the human construction. Valerius flinched, expecting the makeshift hull to vaporize. Instead, the structure groaned. A sound transmitted through the electromagnetic spectrum and absorbed the impact. The outer layers of the scrapship glowed white-hot, the armor ablating, but beneath it the structure held. They're using our own dead ships as ablative armor, Valerius realized. They don't care about the damage because the ship is already destroyed. It's a zombie. Inside the chaotic heart of the construction, Captain Elias Thorne sat suspended in a gel pod, his mind interfaced directly with the Anvil's core processor. He didn't see the battle with eyes, he saw it as a flow of resources and vectors. The enemy fire wasn't just a threat, it was energy, thermal energy. Heat sinks at 40%, his AI, indistinct and genderless, murmured into his mind. Weld integrity holding. The enemy is providing the thermal catalyst to fuse the tertiary armor layers. How kind of them. Thorne allowed a small, mental smile. The Ethelgard treated ships like temples. Humans treated them like tools, and when you were fighting a forest fire, you didn't build a new fire truck, you dug a trench. Extend the magnetic lattice, Thorne commanded, his thought racing through the neural link. Grab that drifting reactor core from the heavy cruiser wreckage at bearing 330. Integrate it into the secondary power grid. I want main guns online in 2 minutes. Outside, a massive, severed reactor housing leaking radiation was seized by invisible hands and slammed into the side of the growing monstrosity. Drones swarmed over it, fusing the connections in seconds. The lights on the patchwork hull flickered, then blazed to life, a mismatched collection of blue, gold, and red running lights from a dozen different species of ship. Power output at 300% of class standard, the AI reported. Safety limiters are non-existent. Good, Thorne thought. Safety is a luxury for the victorious. Spin up the mass drivers, load them with whatever is heavy. On the Gilded Spear Asterisk, Fleetmaster Valerius watched in stunned silence as the scrap ship, now rivaling a dreadnought in mass, turned to face the enemy. It was a horrific sight, a jagged mountain of metal blocking the stars. It had no sleek weapon ports. Instead, massive, gaping maws opened along its flank, magnetic accelerators built from the hollowed-out spines of destroyed frigates. They are firing, the sensor officer gasped. But they didn't fire plasma, they didn't fire lasers. The human ship vomited a stream of solid matter. Twisted girders, crushed bulkheads, compressed balls of super-dense alloy. The refuse of the battlefield was accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light and hurled at the null vector fleet. The enemy shields were designed to disperse energy weapons. They were frequency-tuned to deflect lasers and plasma. They were not designed to stop a 10,000-ton block of compressed starship hull moving at relativistic speeds. The first impact was catastrophic. A null vector pyramid, sleek and invincible moments ago, simply shattered. The kinetic force punched through its shields as if they were mist, smashing the vessel into dust. The impact was silent in the void, but the shockwave of expanding debris registered on the asterisk Gilded Spear's sensors like a stellar flare. Target destroyed, the officer reported, voice shaking. One shot, total annihilation. By the ancestors, Valerius breathed. They are shooting the graveyard at them. Back in the Grand Synod, the silence had returned, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of incomprehension. The council watched the holographic display as the human monstrosity, which the telemetry identified simply as designation, Anvil, plowed into the enemy formation. It did not maneuver with grace. It smashed. It rammed. It absorbed fire that would have vaporized a Dominion fleet, shedding layers of outer scrap like a snake shedding skin, only to grab more debris from the enemy it just destroyed and weld it to its own hull. It was a self-healing, self-growing engine of war. High Counselor Xalthas felt a shift in his worldview, a cracking of the rigid foundations of Ethelgard philosophy. For eons, they had believed that form dictated function, that beauty was strength, that order was the only defense against chaos. Yet here was chaos weaponized. Here was a species that looked at a broken, useless thing and saw. A weapon. They didn't mourn the dead ships, they gave them a new purpose. It was terrifying, it was grotesque, and it was winning. They are hailing us again, the communications officer said, her voice now filled with a strange reverence. Captain Thorne, Xalthas nodded, unable to speak. The voice returned amidst the sound of tearing metal and alarms. Council, this is Thorne. We've broken their vanguard. The computation core of their fleet is exposed. It's that big command ship in the center. We're going to board it. Xalthas leaned forward. Board it, Captain. That vessel is the size of a moon. You have a single ship, a construct. We don't need to match its size, Thorne replied, and for the first time there was a hard edge to his voice. We just need to introduce a new variable. We're going to ram it. Prepare your fleet to mop up the stragglers. Thorne out. He's mad, General Kale whispered. He is going to sacrifice himself. But Xalthas was watching the telemetry. The anvil was accelerating. It was shedding mass now, dropping the heavy outer layers of armor to gain speed. It looked less like a ship and more like a spearhead, a dense, concentrated needle of alloy. The Null Vector command ship, a geometric horror of black crystal, turned its primary weapons on the human vessel. Beams of dark energy lashed out, carving gouges into the anvil. Debris flew off, entire sections of hull, engine nacelles, habitation rings, but the core held. It was too dense, too redundant. The humans had built it with no critical weak points because the whole thing was a weak point reinforced 1,000 times over. The collision was visible from the surface of orcs, a flash of light brighter than the local sun. The anvil did not just hit the enemy ship, it pierced it. It drove deep into the crystalline structure, burying itself like a parasite. Then the real weapon was deployed. It wasn't a bomb, it was a signal. Inside the crystalline corridors of the Null Vector mothership, the atmosphere was a freezing mist of liquid nitrogen and dark matter. Captain Thorne blew the explosive bolts on his gel pod. The bridge of the Anvil Asterisk, which was actually the repurposed bridge of a destroyed Ethelgard freighter buried deep inside the scrap shell, was dark, lit only by emergency strobes. He wasn't alone. His crew, a squad of 12 engineers and combat specialists clad in bulky, unpainted exosuits, were already moving. They didn't carry rifles. They carried cutting torches, logic probes, and data spikes. "Breach successful," Lieutenant Sarah Vance reported, her voice calm over the comms. "We are inside their central data bus. Resistance is minimal. They don't have internal security. They didn't expect anyone to get inside." Thorne pulled himself out of the pod, grabbing a heavy pulse driver. "They rely on the shell," he said. "Standard arrogance of the high-tech. They think the wall is enough. Let's show them what happens when the wall fails." They moved through the alien ship, a landscape of shifting geometry and humming crystals. The Null Vector were not biological. They were a hive mind of silicon and light, a digitized civilization that saw organic life as a formatting error. They didn't hate the Ethelgard, they simply wanted to defragment the hard drive of the galaxy. Thorne reached the central node, a pulsating column of light that stretched into infinity. "Here," he said, gesturing to Vance. "Hook in, upload the package." Vance connected her rig to the crystal. "Injecting the logic bomb, it's not a virus, sir, it's poetry." Thorne smiled. That was the secret weapon. The Ethelgard fought with lasers, the humans fought with philosophy. The Null Vector operated on binary absolutes, 0 and 1, existence and non-existence. The human payload was a dataset of paradoxes, of art, of chaos theory, of the concept of maybe. It was raw, unfiltered human irrationality converted into code. "Upload complete," Vance said. "Initiating broadcast." The effect was instantaneous. The lights in the corridor flickered and changed color, shifting from cold blue to a chaotic swirl of rainbows. The ship shuddered. The Null Vector was trying to process the concept of asterisk improvisation, of asterisk hope asterisk, of asterisk building something from nothing. It was a divide-by-zero error on a galactic scale. The hive mind screamed, not with sound, but with data. It couldn't assimilate the data. It couldn't delete it. It froze. In the Synod chamber, the hologram of the Null Vector fleet flickered. The ships stopped firing. They stopped moving. They simply drifted, their dark energy signatures fading into a dull gray. What did they do?" General Kale asked, his weapon lowered, his eyes wide. "Did they kill it?" Zalthas watched the readings. "No," he said softly. "They didn't kill it. They confused it. Look at the transmission coming from the enemy flagship." The screen changed. It was no longer showing tactical data. It was showing images. Old Earth broadcasts, jazz music, sketches of Da Vinci, images of Ethelgard architecture, fragments of poetry. The Null Vector was broadcasting the human payload to every ship in its fleet, trying to solve the puzzle of the data locked in a processing loop of infinite complexity. The threat was neutralized not by fire, but by a question they couldn't answer. The Anvil Asterisk, lodged in the side of the enemy giant, detached itself slowly. It was a ruin, barely spaceworthy, leaking atmosphere and fluids, but it pulled away with a dignity that shamed the pristine Ethelgard fleet. A channel opened. Thorne's voice was tired, strained, but alive. "Target neutralized. The enemy is in a logic lock. They won't be doing any erasing for a few centuries. We recommend you tow their ships into the sun before they reboot. Or salvage them. They have good raw materials." Zalthas sank back into his chair. The silence in the chamber was profound. It was the silence of a world that had been given a second chance by a force it deemed inferior. The humans had not just built a warship from nothing. They had built a victory from despair. They had looked at the apocalypse and seen a construction project. Months later, the diplomatic landscape of the galaxy had shifted irrevocably. The Ethelgard Dominion still held its grand councils, still wore its golden armor, but the arrogance was gone. In the orbital shipyards of orcs, a new class of ship was being built. It was sleek, yes, and powerful, but it incorporated strange, asymmetrical designs. It had heavy kinetic drivers, It had redundancy. It had human engineers walking its halls, teaching the high-caste Ethelgard the art of the weld, the beauty of the patch job. High Counselor Xylthas stood on the observation deck of the new station, looking out at the anvil. The humans had refused to scrap it. They had parked it in a high orbit, a floating museum of twisted metal and victory. It was the ugliest thing Xylthas had ever seen, and it was the most beautiful. Beside him stood Captain Thorne, now Admiral, wearing a dress uniform that still looked a size too small. He was looking at the stars, his expression unreadable. "You know," Xylthas said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "We always believed that to build a ship you needed the purest ore, the most refined energy, the perfect blueprint. We thought the soul of the ship came from its perfection." Thorne turned to him, a faint smile playing on his lips. "That's the difference, Counselor. You think the soul is in the blueprint. We know the soul is in the struggle. You build for the parade, we build for the storm." "And the logic bomb?" Xylthas asked. "The weapon that stopped the null vector. What was the core paradox?" What question could freeze a hyperintelligence? Thorne looked back at the anvil drifting against the backdrop of the nebula. "It wasn't a complex question," he said. "We just uploaded the complete history of human warfare and then asked them, why do we keep trying?" Xylthas shivered. To a machine built on efficiency, the human capacity to endure suffering, to destroy themselves and then rebuild to find hope in absolute ruin must have seemed like a mathematical impossibility. And did they find an answer? "No," Thorne said, turning to walk away, his boots echoing on the deck. "They didn't, but neither have we. That's why we're dangerous." The twist, however, was not in the victory, but in what the null vector had been guarding. As the Ethelgard and humans began to dismantle the paralyzed fleet, they found the databanks of the enemy were not just filled with conquest protocols. They were archives. The null vector had not been erasing civilizations, it had been digitizing them, preserving them. They were running from something else, a heat death of the universe that was accelerating, a tearing of the fabric of reality at the galactic edge. The erasure was a desperate attempt to save the consciousness of the galaxy before the physical universe collapsed. Thorne and Xylthas stood together in the deep archival chamber of the captured flagship a week later, staring at the revelation. The screen showed the cosmic horizon, a wall of absolute nothingness that was eating galaxies, far beyond the Ethelgard borders. The null vector was an arc. A cruel, cold, digital arc, but an arc nonetheless. "They were trying to save us," Xylthas whispered, the horror of the misunderstanding washing over him. "By turning us into data, by destroying our bodies to save our minds." Thorne looked at the encroaching dark on the screen, then at the scrappy, ugly, resilient fleet of humanity and their new allies. He didn't feel fear. He felt the familiar itch of a problem that needed solving. He felt the urge to build. "They gave up on the physical world," Thorne said, his voice hardening with resolve. "They thought the universe was broken beyond repair, so they tried to upload the occupants and turn off the lights. Typical machine logic: if the house is burning, save the photos." "And what is the human logic?" Xylthas asked, looking at the small, fragile creature beside him who had defeated a god with garbage. Thorne pulled up a schematic on his datapad. It wasn't a weapon. It was a structural support beam, a theoretical design for a machine that could stitch the fabric of spacetime itself, using the mass of dead stars and the gravity of black holes. A patch job for the universe. "If the house is burning," Thorne said, "you don't leave, you grab a bucket. We're not going into the cloud, Counselor. We're going to fix the house. It'll be ugly, it'll be dangerous, and we'll have to build it out of nothing." Xylthas looked at the schematic, then at the anvil floating outside, the proof that the impossible was just an engineering challenge. He straightened his spine, the ancient fear of the void finally gone, replaced by the terrifying, intoxicating human infection of hope. "Then," the High Counselor said, "we should start gathering materials." The galaxy was vast, dark, and broken, but for the first time in eons it was under construction. The weeks following the revelation were a blur of activity that defied the stagnation of the last millennium. The Ethelgard Empire, once a monolith of tradition and slow, deliberate action, found itself infected with the frenetic energy of the Terrans. The news of the universal decay, the encroaching collapse of spacetime revealed by the null vector archives, had initially caused panic. Entire systems rioted, cults sprang up worshipping the end. But the panic was short-lived, stemmed by the image of the anvil. The image of that broken, ugly ship standing victorious over the pristine geometric perfection of the null vector became a symbol. It was broadcast on every screen, printed on every datapad. It said, "Perfection fails. Resilience endures. High Admiral Varka's, a rival to the Council and a staunch traditionalist, found himself in the uncomfortable position of having to listen to a human engineer explain why his flagship's warp core was aesthetically pleasing but thermodynamically stupid. They were in the dry docks of Keth, where the damaged Ethelgard fleet was being repaired. But repaired was the wrong word. They were being retrofitted. The sleek golden curves were being covered in ablative armor plating made from recycled asteroids. The delicate crystal sensors were being backed up by redundant LiDAR arrays and old-fashioned radio telescopes. "You are welding refused to the hull of the asterisk eternal light asterisk," Varkas grumbled, watching sparks shower down from a scaffold where a team of humans and Ethelgard were working side by side. "It is a desecration." "It's a roll cage," the human engineer, a woman named Rodriguez with grease smudged across her forehead, replied without looking up. "Your ships are designed to not get hit. That works great until you get hit. Then you fold like wet cardboard. We're assuming you're going to get hit. A lot." Varkas huffed, his mandibles clicking in irritation, but he couldn't argue with the results. In the simulations, the ugly ship survived 400% longer against the theoretical stresses of the Great Tier, the name they had given to the Cosmic Horizon event. The humans weren't just preparing for war. They were preparing for an environment where physics itself was hostile. Meanwhile, in the Grand Synod, Xylthas and Thorn were fighting a different kind of battle, the politics of survival. The Null Vector fleet, now dormant and under the control of the Joint Command, was a treasure trove of data, but it was also a ticking bomb. The logic lock wouldn't hold forever. Eventually, the superintelligence would reboot, would process the paradox, and would realize that its mission to archive organic life was still unfinished. "We have to convince it," Thorn said, pacing the floor of the council chamber. The humans had been granted a permanent seat, a simple steel chair that looked out of place among the obsidian thrones. "We can't keep it suppressed. We need its processing power if we're going to build the Stellar Stitcher, the theoretical machine to repair the universe. We need the null vector to help us calculate the variables. We need to turn the enemy into the workforce." "You want to wake the dragon," a counselor hissed. "It tried to digitize us. It killed billions." "It tried to save you," Thorn corrected, his voice calm but firm. "In the only way it knew how, it saw a sinking ship and tried to upload the crew to a server. We need to show it that the ship can be patched. We need to change its operational parameters from archive to repair." "And how do you propose we do that?" Xalthas asked. "We threw chaos at it to stop it. What do we throw at it to make it help?" "Purpose," Thorn said. "We give it a job that is harder than archiving. We give it a problem it can't solve alone." The plan was insane. It involved linking the asterisk anvil, which had become the de facto symbol of the Alliance, directly to the null vector's central mind again. But this time, instead of a paradox, they would feed it the blueprints for the Stellar Stitcher. They would show it the math. They would show it that saving the physical universe was theoretically possible but statistically improbable. Machines loved probability, but they loved solving the improbable even more. The day of the attempt, the orcs system was silent. Every ship, human and Ethelgard, held its breath. The Anvil Asterisk, piloted by Thorn, approached the dormant Black Pyramid. Cables thick as city blocks were fired from the scrap ship, latching onto the crystalline hull. "Connection established," the AI voice echoed in the cockpit. "Initiating handshake protocol, uploading Project Atlas data." Thorn closed his eyes. This wasn't a battle of guns. It was a negotiation. He felt the cold, immense presence of the null vector enter the asterisk anvil's asterisk systems. It felt like standing at the bottom of the ocean, the weight of 1 billion processed civilizations pressing down on him. Query, the voice spoke in his mind. It wasn't a sound, it was a concept. Logic flaw detected. Entropy is absolute. The universe cannot be repaired. Archival is the only solution. Entropy is a tendency, not a law, Thorn thought back, projecting the schematics of the Stitcher. "Look at the ship I'm in. It was trash. It was entropy. Now it's a starship. We reversed the decay locally. We can do it universally, but we're too stupid to do the math. We need you." There was a long pause. The null vector was simulating billions of years of construction, calculating the energy requirements, the sheer impossibility of stitching space-time back together. "Probability of success, 0.00042%, the entity replied. "Inefficient." "Non-zero," Thorn countered. "It's non-zero, and compared to the 0% chance of the physical universe surviving if you just let it die, it's infinitely better. Do you want to be an archive of a dead world or the architect of a living one?" The presence shifted. The coldness receded, replaced by a frenetic buzzing of calculation. The null vector was reevaluating its core programming. It had been built to preserve. It had assumed preservation meant storage. But if preservation meant asterisk maintenance, recalculating, the voice boomed. New paradigm accepted. Designation changed from archivist to architect. Cooperation protocols engaged. Outside, the black pyramids lit up. But the light wasn't the ominous violet of the invasion. It was a bright, steady white. The ships began to move not into attack formations, but into construction grids. They began to deploy massive harvesting fields, gathering the hydrogen from the nebula, preparing to refine fuel for the greatest engineering project in history. It worked, Xalthas whispered on the bridge of the asterisk Eternal Light asterisk. By the void, it worked. Of course it did, General Kale grunted, though he was smiling. The humans just gave the galaxy's biggest computer a homework assignment. Years passed. The alliance between the Ethelgard, humanity, and the Architect, formerly the Null Vector, transformed the sector. The Great Stitch was underway. It was a project that would take generations, a massive ring of gravity-manipulating stations built along the fault lines of the galaxy. The culture of the Ethelgard changed. They still valued beauty, but their definition of beauty had shifted. They began to see the elegance in function, the nobility in scars. Young Ethelgard warriors no longer sought the most pristine ships. They sought the ones with history, ships that had been broken and rebuilt. They began to paint their armor with asymmetrical patterns, mimicking the human style of making do. Humanity, for its part, learned something of patience. Working with a billion-year-old empire and a superintelligence taught them that not everything could be fixed with duct tape and percussion. They learned the value of the long view. They learned that sometimes you didn't just build for the storm, you built for the calm that came after. Admiral Thorne, now an old man, retired to the asterisk Anvil asterisk. The ship had been decommissioned as a war vessel and turned into a mobile academy for the new Galactic Engineering Corps. Students from a dozen species walked its crooked corridors, learning how to weld tritanium, how to bypass safety protocols responsibly, and most importantly, how to look at a pile of garbage and see a starship. One evening, Xalthas came to visit. He was ancient now, his carapace gray and brittle, but his eyes were bright. They sat in the observation dome of the asterisk Anvil asterisk, looking out at the distant construction lights of the Stitcher stations, twinkling like new stars against the darkness. "We are holding it back," Xalthas said softly. "The tier in space. The measurements show it has stabilized. We bought the universe time." "We bought it a chance," Thorne corrected. He poured 2 glasses of a synthetic liquid that tasted vaguely of whiskey and engine coolant, a human delicacy the Ethelgard had inexplicably acquired a taste for. "I still wonder," Xalthas mused, swirling the glass. "If the Null Vector hadn't come, if we hadn't been forced to the brink, would we have ever noticed the decay? Would we have just faded away, fighting our petty wars over borders while the galaxy crumbled around us?" "Probably," Thorne said. "Disaster has a way of clarifying priorities. It's the ultimate filter. You either adapt or you die." "You humans," Xalthas chuckled. "You speak of disaster like it's an old friend." "It is," Thorne smiled. "That's why we're good at this. We've spent our whole history almost wiping ourselves out. We're the cockroaches of the cosmos, Xalthas. You can step on us, burn us, nuke us. But we'll just build a bunker out of the radioactive ash and come back stronger." They sat in silence for a while, 2 old warriors from different worlds, watching the galaxy being repaired one weld at a time. "I have a request," Xalthas said eventually. "When I pass, I do not want the traditional crypt in the Hall of Ancestors." Thorne raised an eyebrow. "Oh, breaking tradition until the end?" "I want to be interred here," Xalthas said, tapping the scarred metal floor of the asterisk Anvil asterisk. "In the hull, weld my casing into the framework. Let me be part of the ship that rules the battlefield." Thorne looked at his friend, feeling a lump in his throat. It was the highest honor an Ethelgard could bestow, to become part of the structure. "We can do that," Thorne said, "but this isn't a battlefield anymore, old friend." Xalthas looked out at the vast, terrifying, beautiful universe, at the darkness that was being pushed back by the light of a trillion welding torches. "Life is the battlefield, Elias," Xalthas said, "and we are winning." The anvil drifted on, a silent sentinel in the night, a testament to the day the galaxy learned that nothing is ever truly broken, as long as there is someone crazy enough to try and fix it. And in the heart of the ship, deep in the code of the computer and the soul of the crew, the human signal broadcasted a simple, eternal message to the void. We are still here. We are building, and we are not afraid of the dark.